I remember crying at my high school graduation. Anybody just do that? I went to a 7th through 12th grade Catholic preparatory school in Atlanta. It was a really good experience. I look back on it now and I can see all the missing pieces, like a real solid sense of Catholic identity and formation. But otherwise, I had a good 6 years. And high school in particular was a good 4 years. I grew a lot. I struggled a lot. I saw a lot of friends come and go. In fact, by the time I was a senior, I had very few friends because so many of them had decided they wanted to give themselves to their girlfriends. They wanted to spend every weekend partying. They wanted to start experimenting with all kinds of different drugs. And I just knew that I wasn't strong enough to be around those folks. So by the time I graduated, I remember feeling very alone. And that summer I worked in retail and started a relationship, broke up with a relationship, went off to Vanderbilt. And the very first day showing up, freshman year, I'm in a frat house, and I've got a beer, one in each hand, and a decision before me. Who am I going to be for the rest of my life? You guys are at this really amazing moment. You can decide right now in a very tangible way who you want to be for the rest of your life. And I decided to set down those beer cans that night. I hung out for another 10 minutes just out of courtesy. And then I found my way back up to my dorm. I started praying, Lord, send me friends who love you above all else, because I've never felt more like a man on an island than I do right now. And sure enough, 1 week at a time, he would send me somebody new. Before I knew it, I had surrounded myself with amazing Christians. I have this really vivid memory that was coming to me at Mass this morning of staying up late. These were mostly evangelical Protestants at the time, really beautiful people who loved Jesus above. I mean, some of them thought I was going to hell because I was Catholic. We eventually got over that, okay? But at the time, all my other friends were atheists and agnostics, so I felt really comforted by these Christian friends of mine. And we would read books together, and we would go into accountability groups together. And there was this one night where, 10 of us went down into the basement of the dorm from midnight until 4 a.m. And I'm just sitting there on this nasty old acoustic upright piano, and we're just singing praise and worship. We had no business staying up till 4 a.m. I had a 9 o'clock class that semester, so I got no more than 4 hours of sleep that night. But these are sweet memories of the Lord's love in the first few months of my college career. If we go in hungry, open, wanting community, wanting to grow in our faith, I don't see how the Lord could possibly turn down that prayer. He's a father who wants to provide for his children. That accountability group was me and 3 other men. We started to memorize scripture together. That was very new to me. I never stopped going to Mass on Sundays, but there wasn't much else happening in my spiritual life that was particularly Catholic at the time. Accountability group, this praise and worship night on Tuesdays, these random late night worship sessions in the basement. All the books I was reading at the time were written by pretty well-known Protestant pastors. And the Lord was moving in my heart, and then eventually I went to this conference in Nashville called the Passion Conference. It was a really amazing 4-day event, and it was then that I realized that Jesus Christ couldn't just be an important part of my life anymore. He needed to be the centerpiece of my existence. He needs to literally be the air that I breathed. And it was about a month after that one of my very best friends pulled out our catechism and said, Jimmy, it's because of your church's teachings on salvation that there's no way you'll be able to go to heaven. You've got to change your opinion on some of these things if you're going to spend eternity with God. Which really hurt. You can imagine that put a little bit of a wedge in our friendship, And it also spiraled into a whole new life of prayer and study for me. I started going to Mass a little more often. I started reading a lot of apologetics. I said, Lord, I'm going to give your church the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. And every time I went on a treasure hunt, I kept coming up face to face with the church and her saints and her martyrs and the early church fathers. And I realized that this is it. This is what it means to be a Christian in the fullest sense, is to be a Catholic. About a year later, I kind of met my first Catholic friend in college, and we would go to Mass once a week together, usually at 7 a.m., which was really painful. And then we would climb these crazy buildings on campus, highly illegal activity. We'd go onto the roofs, and we would pray rosaries. By the way, I didn't even know how to pray rosary at the time. In fact, there's this little holiday in mid-February called Singles Awareness Day. Do you know what I'm talking about? Valentine's Day. And in February of 2006, all of my friends had like really cool dates or really cool girlfriends. So I was feeling kind of lame. I was actually hanging out outside of a friend's dorm in rollerblades because we were going to the park. That's what we were going to do that day. It's like, gosh, I am so lame. And I reach my hand into my pocket, and I feel this rosary that I had been carrying there for about 2 months. And I had no idea what to do with it or how a rosary even worked, but for some reason I had been carrying it. It had been given to me for my birthday a couple of months prior. And so I decided this was a moment of decision. And actually, I heard this voice, not really out of the clouds, but in the depths of my heart. I heard God the Father say, Jimmy, if you ever want to fall in love with a woman on earth, you must first know and love your mother in heaven. At the time, by the way, I was having a rough go in my life of purity and chastity. It was a struggle. And I would literally clench my fists and grit my teeth, hoping that I could conquer those sins of pornography, masturbation, looking at women and not upholding their dignity the way that they deserved. Frankly, there was a lot of pride in my life at that time too, ironically. You would think a struggle such as, that of purity and chastity would also lead to some humility, but not in my life. I was living a hidden life, or at least a double life. Minus the few friends that I shared openly with, I had a mask on. When I began to pray the rosary, I began to fall in love with Jesus through Mary in a whole new way. Lent began a few weeks later. I made a commitment to pray this thing every day. I had a cheat sheet in my back pocket, and by Easter, I was in love. I was smitten. I'm going to stop the story there because that was a turning point for me. Because up until that point, Jesus meant a lot to me. I wanted to conquer my sins. But ultimately, I didn't know who I was. My identity was still wrapped up in the work of my hands. It was wrapped up in what people thought of me, how well I did in school, how I performed on the sports fields, even though they were just intramural sports. The kind of internships that I was landing in the music industry, the kind of people that I was beginning to hobnob with in the city of Nashville. My identity was wrapped up in everything wrong. I want to show this movie clip here from Rocky, the new Rocky Balboa, that kind of captures this identity crisis, this confusion of what it means to be human, what it means to be a beloved son or daughter of God. I think it captures it really well. Check it out.
You guys are a joke. It's going to get crushed.
Oh, who's here?
Is this from the father?
In the back.
Unbelievable. Wonderful. You're doing good. You're enjoying everything, all right? Excuse me. How you doing? Glad you come by.
Can I talk with you?
Sure.
Can we do it outside? So you're going through with this?
Yeah, I start training tomorrow.
Hey, Rock. I made some connections. I could make some money on this, endorsements.
Absolutely, do that.
Thank you, Rock.
Sure.
Okay.
So you nervous about the fight?
They're scared to death.
You don't look scared?
Well, you ain't supposed to.
Then you don't have to do it.
Yeah, well, I think I do.
You know, living with you, it hasn't been easy. People see me, but they think of you. Now with all this going on, this is gonna be worse than ever.
It don't have to be.
No, sure it does.
Why? You got a lot going on, kid.
Oh, what, my last name? That's the reason I got a decent job. That's the reason why people deal with me in the first place. Now I start to get a little ahead. I start to get a little something for myself, and this happens. Now I'm asking you as a favor not to go through with this, okay? This is only gonna end up bad for you, and it's gonna end up bad for me.
You think I'm hurting you?
Yeah, in a way you are.
It's the last thing I ever wanted to do.
I know that's not what you want to do, but that's just the way that it is. Don't you care what people think? Doesn't it bother you that people are making you out to be a joke and that I'm gonna be included in that? Do you think that's right? Do you?
You ain't gonna believe this, but you used to fit right here. I'd hold you up and say to your mother, this kid's gonna be the best kid in the world. This kid's gonna be somebody better than anybody ever knew. And you grew up good and wonderful. It was great just watching you every day. It was like a privilege. Then the time come for you to be your own man and take on the world, and you did. But somewhere along the line, you changed. You stopped being you. You let people stick a finger in your face and tell you you're no good. And when things got hard, you started looking for something to blame, like a big shadow. Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Now, if you know what you're worth, now go out and get what you're worth. But you gotta be willing to take the hits and not pointing fingers saying you ain't where you wanna be because of him or her or anybody. Cowards do that, and that ain't you. You're better than that. I'm always gonna love you no matter what. No matter what happens. You're my son, you're my blood. You're the best thing in my life. But until you start believing in yourself, you ain't gonna have a life. Don't forget to visit your mother. Yeah, those are beautiful.
Yeah.
You get off early from work.
No. I left. Quit.
Quit, why?
I wasn't very... I don't know, I didn't fit in there.
I understand. So what are you gonna do?
Right now? Right now, I'd rather be with you. Is that all right?
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've seen a fight.
This session is all about keeping the faith in college. And the quickest way to lose the faith is to forget who you are. I know you guys aren't too young to appreciate The Lion King, even though that came out when I was like 10 or 8 or something. You were just a thought somewhere in the recesses of your mom's mind, your dad's heart. Remember who you are. Those words are so important to the Christian. I have a really good friend. We were seminarians together at one point. Obviously, I dropped out, didn't go all the way through. Some of the priests actually here at the conference this weekend, we were seminarians together, which is pretty cool. If you want some stories, I got them. But this friend of mine said, Jimmy, the whole of the Christian enterprise can be summed up in this: remembrance. Remembering who we are, remembering what Jesus has done for us. and how that changes everything, because love changes everything. The cross and the resurrection change everything. This turning point in my own life, when I began praying the rosary every day, I stopped fighting. I stopped worrying. I began abandoning myself, surrendering myself, and trusting myself to the Lord. And it wasn't this concerted effort. It just started happening, which I really believe was the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So one of the first pieces of advice to keep the faith in college is to get really close to her, to pray constantly that her mantle of protection would be around you, that she would lead you closer and closer to her Son. Because after that point, I couldn't help but want to go to daily Mass. I was still pretty alone as a Catholic, by the way. Most of my friends were still evangelical Protestants at the time. The summer after this, I spent 2 months in Honduras as a missionary. I thought, well, this would be kind of a cool way to spend a couple months. I found this program at Vanderbilt that would pay for the whole thing. I said, all right, I'm doing this. And I lived with Franciscan missionaries in Comayagua, Honduras for 8 weeks. And it was there that I began to pray with the rhythm of the church's prayer. For the first time in my life, I discovered something called Liturgy of the Hours. Anybody ever heard of that? Morning prayer, evening prayer, night prayer. It is so spectacular because all we're doing is entering into this larger prayer, this universal prayer, not only of the present global church, but of the historical church. We stand on the shoulders of spiritual giants when we pray. For those of you who have a smartphone, download Laudatio or iBreviary. But it looks like iBreviary, all right? Download one of those things. Go through Lectio Divina every day, whatever the gospel reading is for that particular daily Mass. Pray through it. And if you have time, start working your way through these prayers of the church because it's Scripture. It's the very Psalms that Jesus, as a faithful Jew, would have had memorized. And that rocked me that summer. The prayer of the missionaries and then the service to the poor. Because these beautiful, abandoned orphan children would look up at you with such joy and such hope and such love. You couldn't help but be captivated by them. These people who seemed to have nothing, in fact, had everything. That's the joy of the gospel. That's the miracle of spiritual poverty. Those who seem to have nothing, if they have Jesus, have in fact everything. That began to really hit home that summer. The other thing that began to hit home was the need for humility. That I needed to turn my life around and be a man, not for myself, but for others. That's why I love the way this starts out. So humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. At the very middle point of that 8-week missionary experience, I went backpacking over to Guatemala with one of my best friends. We just hopped on public transportation, crossed borders, checked out Mayan ruins, no big deal. Showed up in Antigua. We found these hostels that were $2 a night. Not exactly the cleanest or safest of places to stay, but it didn't really matter much. We had nothing valuable on us. We didn't care. We saw these volcanoes off in the distance, and we said, we want to climb them. Here's an image of those volcanoes. You see, there's something that happens in a man's mind at age 25. It's the full development of his frontal lobe. And up until age 25, we're sort of stuck without our full capacity for reason, all right? So to the parents out there, the ladies out there, bear with us. We're very different from you. I've heard it said that men are like waffles, women are like spaghetti. Do you know why that is? When you pour the syrup on the waffles, there's certain compartments on the waffle that remain empty. Okay, so when we're staring off into space and you wonder what we're thinking about and we say nothing, we mean it. Totally possible. We have this way of compartmentalizing. I mean, I can hardly understand my own emotions, much less somebody else's. There's this thing out there called empathy, ladies, where you feel someone else's emotions. That's no way. I have no idea what that's like. I've been trying, Lord, give me your sacred heart. Maybe one day he'll give it to me. But for now, I'm just kind of stuck trying to mess with my own mystery of emotion. And ladies, you're like this beautiful, integrated, feminine genius, like the spaghetti. It's all just in there. You know, from what I've heard, what you're feeling is what you're thinking, is what you're expressing, and I just can't imagine that. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. And so this day we thought, all right, let's climb the volcanoes. What could possibly go wrong climbing a volcano? And we began to hear all these stories of young, white, very innocent-looking kids from America, like us, who had tried to climb the volcanoes by themselves and either been stolen from, like to the point where they came back with nothing but the shirt on their back, or actually killed. We thought, okay, maybe we'll hire a Guatemalan guide. Not a bad idea. And so we did. We got food poisoning the night before, recovered somehow by a miracle. The next morning, we show up to meet our Guatemalan guide, and we begin to climb up this volcano. Remember, I'm telling you this story because it was one of the first vivid memories of God humbling me before His majesty. Okay, I had played football for 9 years in high school, up and through high school. We won a state championship my senior year. I thought, all right, I can handle a volcano. All right, I've done the Stairmaster, I've done the stadium stairs, I've done it all, right? But you know what I've never done? A Stairmaster for 5 hours straight. Never in my life. And that's what it is to climb a volcano that's 12,000 feet high. So we began the climb. I lost hope within about 45 minutes that I was going to make it. Every part of me wanted to just collapse onto the dirt floor. And eventually we get to the top and we find ourselves in the midst of a cloud. Disappointing because we thought we were going to get this beautiful view of Antigua beneath us. But no, we were stuck in a cloud, and so we just plopped ourselves down on this colossal rock, ate our lunch, licked our wounds a little bit, and then began the descent back down the volcano. And about an hour into that descent, the clouds opened up. We found ourselves at a lookout point, and we beheld all of Antigua. It looked like all of Guatemala, and quite frankly, it felt like all of creation before us. In that moment, like so many other moments in our lives, I felt small. And it felt good to feel small. Some of you, when you show up day one of your freshman year in just a few weeks, you're going to feel small. You're going to feel like a number. You're going to feel like you don't know a single living, breathing soul on that campus. Some of you are going to have some crazy random roommate like the one that I had that I kicked out 5 months later. I said, I can't handle this anymore, you know? It's lonely, but it's good to feel small. Because before God's majesty, we can remember who we are in light of Him. Children, beloved sons and daughters. One additional story, a couple of months later, I found myself studying abroad. These are all things I highly recommend doing while you're in college, by the way. Spend a summer as a missionary. Go somewhere where you are completely out of your comfort zone, completely uncomfortable, serving the poorest of the poor. Do whatever it takes. That's an experience that you cannot substitute. If you have an opportunity also to study abroad, to go over to Western Europe and really get to the root system of Christendom, I couldn't recommend it more highly either. Because on a 2-week pilgrimage before classes started in London, my friends and I did a Bavarian, Eastern Europe backpacking trip. And one day we found ourselves in Munich. We show up at the train station, and there's pictures of Pope Benedict everywhere. And I'm like, well, this is very strange. I'm the only Catholic amongst my friends at the time, so I'm the only one kind of noticing and wondering, curious what's happening. We find out a few hours later that Pope Benedict is scheduled to arrive 3 days later as part of his Bavarian pilgrimage. He gave a very famous, controversial address during that trip called the Regensburg Address. Some of you might have heard of it. Some of you might have not. Check it out. It's a brilliant discourse on the interplay of faith and reason. But as my friends left for Salzburg 3 days later, I stayed back. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to see the Pope. Really, any Pope would have been fine, okay? I walk in to Marienplatz, the town square of Munich, feeling very small again because I don't speak German, because I really have no idea what I'm doing. I show up 12 hours before he's scheduled to arrive, and I just stand there at a fence, hoping that that is, in fact, about the front row of this whole thing that's about to unfold. I begin to make friends with all these Germans who are about as crazy and Catholic as I am, showing up 12 hours early. And by mid-afternoon, there is a sea of people in every direction. A helicopter can be seen off in the distance. The Holy Father, Pope Benedict, eventually arrives, and this is a picture of exactly what he was wearing, exactly where he was standing when I saw him for the first time. There's so much joy in his facial expression. He's in his hometown. This is where he was Archbishop from 1978 to 1983. This is his first time to visit home as Pope. And I didn't understand a word he said. Not a word. But I felt embraced by the church that day. The same way that St. Peter's colonnade, the colonnade in St. Peter's Square, Bernini's colonnade, it embraces you as you walk in. You feel engulfed by the church as you walk into the front steps of St. Peter's Basilica. In the same way, the Holy Father with his outstretched arms, I felt embraced that day. And the next 4 months, I spent more or less in solitude because I knew if I hung out with my American friends, I wouldn't ever venture out into the unknown. And I only had class for 2 days a week, so I had 5-day weekends to travel all over Europe. And I would show up in strange cities and towns and just kind of figure it out. And the one place I felt at home in the midst of that solitude and oftentimes what felt like loneliness, the one place I felt at home was Catholic churches. That's about the time where I started going to daily Mass. I kept praying that daily rosary. I began praying prayers of intercession. I had this laundry list of people that I prayed for every day. A few months later, I'm back at Vanderbilt. We have a new chaplain. He encourages me to begin something called spiritual direction. I end up discerning to go to seminary. I spend 1 year as a seminarian for the Diocese of Nashville. I discern out. I spend 2 years as a missionary, and then I jump into the music industry, and I've sort of been in this vortex of creative people and of the new evangelization ever since. I share all of that because God, your Father in heaven, has a beautiful plan for your life. He wants to orchestrate a masterpiece. And the next few months of transition can be the beginning of a whole new movement of that symphony. Inasmuch as we're faithful, inasmuch as we're obedient, and we say yes, and we say yes again, and then we say yes again and again and again, just like the Blessed Mother's fiat. When we say yes, grace comes into the world that otherwise the world would never know. Souls will go to heaven by your yes, that otherwise may never have had a chance. And I'll conclude with this, that growing in my prayer life, becoming more and more a man for others, discerning my vocation, making myself available to the Lord, has allowed for more joy and more freedom and more peace than I could have ever imagined. And I'm telling you, anything short of this is dreadfully boring. Anything short of the glory of God touching down in our lives will never bring you the happiness that you long for. Sin always leads to misery. So I don't care if it's drinking or if it's drugs or if it's same-sex attraction or if it's the world that is giving you everything and you find yourself climbing a ladder because you want the fame, you want the success, you want the glory. Whatever it is that becomes your temptation here in a few months, saying no to it and yes to Jesus will fulfill your wildest dreams, beyond your wildest imagination. Because what we long for, the joy, the happiness, the peace that we long for, the infinite plunge into the depths of perfect bliss, that is a life with Jesus Christ. And eternity begins now for the soul surrendered to the Lord. Heaven touches earth, and suddenly the beauty of your holiness changes the course of history. So this might sound kind of pie in the sky and intense, but I'm telling you it's the only way to find joy in college. To give yourselves away in love, first to the Lord in prayer and then to the souls around you. To storm heaven and to bring an army of people with you.